Have you ever stopped to consider that the greatest transformation of your life might not come from something you achieve out there, but from a silent, intimate dialogue happening deep within you? It's not a conversation with powerful people or your boss or even your closest friends. It's a conversation with God. But when I speak of God, I don't mean a distant figure in the sky, watching your every step like a judge. I'm talking about the God that lives within your psyche, the divine whisper, that speaks through your intuition, your dreams, and the subtle signs you ignore when you're too distracted by the noise of the world. There's a simple truth that few truly understand. When you talk to God, when you truly withdraw, quiet your mind, and listen, something inside you begins to change, and that change doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds from the inside out, slowly but permanently. Most people spend their lives chasing formulas, books, strategies, advice, and techniques. None of that is wrong, but all of it is limited when it doesn't come from the essence. You can master every method in the world, but if you can't hear your own soul, you're building on sand. Jeremiah 33:3 says, "Call to me, and I will answer you, and show you great and mighty things which you do not know." Do you grasp the depth of that promise? God doesn't just offer answers, He offers revelations. He opens horizons your rational mind could never reach on its own. Carl Jung once said that the unconscious is the language through which God speaks to us. He whispers through symbols, archetypes, and intuition. Those who ignore these signs become lost among the noise of the world, but those who learn to listen awaken. That is the true spiritual awakening. The moment you realize that the answer you've been searching for was always within you. Those who look outward dream. Those who look inward awaken. That's not just a poetic phrase, it's a roadmap to inner freedom. As long as you believe that your solution lies in people, money, or recognition, you'll remain trapped in a cycle of frustration. But when you turn inward, the chaos begins to organize itself. What once felt confusing becomes clear. Decisions begin to flow with ease, because now you're not acting from logic alone, but from divine direction. When the mind speaks with God, something extraordinary happens. Ideas come alive. They stop being scattered thoughts and become guided visions. Faith turns into movement. Fear transforms into clarity, and what once seemed impossible starts to draw near, not because you became stronger, but because you finally aligned with the current of life. This alignment is the meeting point between the human and the divine. It's the moment you realize you were never alone, that while you were praying, something was already being prepared. While you were doubting, God was already drawing the map, but He only acts fully when there's silence within you. And silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the stillness of the soul. Learn to withdraw, close your eyes and say, "Lord, speak to me, I'm listening," because it's in that sacred pause that transformation begins. It's not in quick answers or external promises, it's in true listening. Self-knowledge is the deepest form of prayer. When you truly know yourself, you recognize the reflection of God within you. And once you recognize that reflection, fear loses its power. Anxiety dissolves. Life begins to flow to a new rhythm, the rhythm of awakened consciousness. Remember this: God doesn't reveal Himself in your rush. He reveals Himself in your stillness. Spirituality isn't about escaping the world, it's about inhabiting it with presence. Every challenge, every pain, every uncertainty is a language through which the divine is trying to teach you something. Nothing is random, everything is symbolic. So right now, make a silent commitment to yourself, to listen more deeply, to trust the silence, and to let God shape you from within. Because this is where the real transformation begins. Seek that inner dialogue every single day. When you wake up, before you touch your phone, before you lose yourself in the rush, close your eyes and say, I choose to hear the voice of God within me. Repeat it in the comments below, not just as words, but as a declaration to yourself and to the universe. And if this message resonates with you, subscribe to Unshakable Mind, where we explore the human soul in its depth, revealing the hidden power in the shadows and the light that's born from self-awareness, because the mind that speaks with God becomes unshakable. And once you awaken to that truth, life will never be the same again. There is a greater force that governs the universe, a silent intelligence sustaining everything that exists, but few truly learn to connect with it because they mistake spirituality for formality. Talking to God isn't a ritual locked in rigid words. It's not about memorizing pretty phrases or repeating things that don't echo in your soul. It's about opening your heart. It's sitting in silence and speaking as if you were talking to your closest friend, without masks, without fear of judgment, without the need to appear strong. It's exposing what is most human within you. Your fears, your dreams, your flaws, your desires. It's laying before him everything that no one else understands, and allowing him to respond in ways no one else can. When you learn to live this way, something changes forever. You no longer feel alone. You no longer feel lost, because you discover that true comfort doesn't come from being understood by others. It comes from being understood by God. Look at the story of Hannah, the mother of Samuel. She was barren, humiliated, dismissed. She cried in silence, carrying a burden no one could lift. But one day, tired of bearing it alone, she did what so many forget to do. She opened her heart to God. She spoke with such honesty, such intensity, that the priest thought she was drunk. But that conversation, that raw, real, vulnerable surrender, changed her entire story. God heard her, God answered, and he turned her pain into a miracle. Maybe that's exactly what you need today, to stop carrying the weight alone, to stop trying to fix everything with your own strength and simply talk, not in rehearsed prayers, but in sincerity. To speak to God like a child pouring their heart out to a father who understands every tear, every silence, every doubt. The problem is that most people only remember God when they're desperate. They treat the Creator like an emergency room for the soul, someone they run to only when the pain becomes unbearable. But life only truly changes when that conversation becomes daily, intimate, and natural. When it stops being a request and becomes a relationship, the human soul longs for that connection. Carl Jung once said that human beings do not suffer only from their traumas, but from a spiritual emptiness, a disconnection from the very source that gives life meaning. He taught that the meeting with the unconscious is, in truth, the meeting with the divine within us. It's there, in the deepest chambers of the psyche, that God speaks, not through audible words, but through symbols, dreams, sensations, and intuition. And the more you practice that kind of listening, the more your life begins to align with something greater. Because prayer is not just about speaking, it's about listening. Listening to what the silence is trying to tell you. Listening to what your heart whispers when the ego finally goes quiet. God doesn't answer with noise, he answers with direction. And sometimes that direction doesn't come the way you imagined. It comes as peace, it comes as calm. It comes as that silent certainty that even if you can't see the full path ahead, you are being guided. The rational mind seeks control, but the soul seeks trust. And trust is born through that intimate, ongoing conversation with God. When you learn to make prayer a part of your daily rhythm, it stops being a religious act and becomes a way of being. You begin to walk through life in conversation with the divine, carrying peace where there used to be confusion and clarity where there once was fear. Because when you live in dialogue with God, you no longer need to see the whole picture to believe. You simply trust that every step you take is guided by something infinitely wiser than yourself. When you walk in communion with the Creator, life begins to take on meaning, because everything that happens, even what seems chaotic, turns into a message. Prayer, therefore, isn't an escape from reality. It's a conscious dive into it. It's looking at the chaos and saying, I know there's purpose in this. It's living with the awareness that every moment, even the hardest ones, are opportunities to grow spiritually. God doesn't shield you from pain to protect you. He strengthens you through it, to prepare you. So if you're facing something you don't understand, right now maybe what you need isn't a solution, but a conversation, a moment of true listening, to kneel before the divine, not with memorized words, but with an open heart. Let me invite you to a simple, powerful practice. When the day ends, before you fall asleep, turn off the lights and talk to God. Tell Him everything, even the things you're ashamed to admit, and then just listen. Don't wait for a voice, wait for a feeling, because He always answers. God speaks to those who truly listen. And those who listen are never the same again. Write this in the comments. I choose to speak with God every day. Declare it as a symbol of the new chapter you're beginning, a chapter of connection and purpose. And remember, if this message speaks to your soul, subscribe now to Unshakable Mind. Here, we explore the human psyche through a spiritual lens. Here, every reflection is an invitation to look within and awaken. Because when the mind opens to dialogue with God, it finds the strength to become truly unshakable. True prayer isn't a religious act, it's nourishment for the soul. It's the sacred moment when the human spirit reconnects with the source of all wisdom, when the ego goes silent and the spirit awakens. Those who learn to speak with God every day begin to see the world with new eyes. They live lighter, calmer, more centered, not because their problems disappear, but because they've found an inner axis, a direction. Think about it for a moment. How many impulsive decisions have you made simply because you didn't pause long enough to listen? How many wrong doors have you walked through, trusting only your logic? How many times have you exhausted yourself trying to carry life's weight alone, when a single conversation with God could have given you the peace and clarity you were searching for? God isn't a distant being locked somewhere in the cosmos. He lives at the center of your consciousness, at the deepest point of your psyche, the place I once called the self. The inner core that holds all balance and meaning. Prayer is the way back to that center. It's in that sacred space that the fragmented self reunites with the whole, and the inner chaos begins to reorganize. Many believe that prayer is about asking, but prayer is, above all else, about listening. The true dialogue with God is a two-way path. You speak, and then you become still. And in that stillness, the answer arrives. Not as a booming voice, but as a subtle knowing, a calm certainty, a quiet sense of direction. God speaks through synchronicities, through signs, through intuitions that surface when the heart is open and the mind is quiet. Those who cultivate this ongoing dialogue discover that God doesn't only appear in grand revelations. He appears in the small gestures, in the coincidences that seem like chance, in the words that arrive at the perfect time. When you learn to live in constant conversation with the divine, life itself becomes a dialogue, a dance between the human and the sacred. And then something extraordinary happens. You begin to realize that you were never alone, that even in your deepest pain, there was always a silent presence guiding your every step. Despair gives way to trust. Fear dissolves into faith. The person who speaks with God daily doesn't run away from life. They dive into it with courage because they know that every moment, every trial is sustained by a higher purpose. So if there is one thing I, Carl Jung, could tell you right now, it would be this: go back to talking with God, not with memorized prayers or mechanical words, but as someone who opens their heart to a friend who listens without judgment, who understands your confusion, your fears, and your deepest longings. Speak honestly, say what hurts, confess what you hide, and then be silent. Wait, observe. The divine always responds, but rarely in the language you expect. Write this in the comments below: I talk to God every day. It's not just a sentence. It's a declaration, a spiritual contract with your own soul. It marks the moment you begin realignment, where your heart and mind start to move in the same rhythm, where the chaos begins to find direction. And if this message has touched something deep inside you, remember to subscribe to Unshakable Mind. Here, we explore the depths of human psychology illuminated by the spiritual dimension. Reflections that invite you to awaken, to grow stronger within, and to discover a peace that nothing external can shake, because the path to transformation doesn't begin with external formulas. It begins with inner listening. When you talk to God, the universe begins to respond. Life starts rearranging itself around your openness. You notice signs, you hear whispers in the silence, and what once felt like coincidence begins to feel like guidance. Stay with me, because the next step on this journey might completely change how you see yourself and the reality around you. There are moments when the deepest answers of life don't come through words, but through silences filled with meaning. There are silences that speak louder than any voice, and it's in that inner stillness that the divine reveals itself. In Philippians 4:6-7, we find one of the most powerful promises of all time. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Pay attention to what's written here. The promise isn't just about answers. It's about peace. A peace that surpasses the limits of reason. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, but on surrender. When you truly talk to God, even before the answer arrives, peace comes first. That peace is the sign, the silent proof, that you've released control into divine hands. And once that peace enters you, something profound happens. Fear loses its grip. Doubt dissolves. The soul finds balance again, because prayer isn't just about asking, it's about trusting. Throughout my life, I, Carl Jung, came to understand that the unconscious, that mysterious dimension that lives in all of us, speaks through symbols, dreams, and synchronicities. And the more you talk to God, the more sensitive you become to those subtle signs. You begin to see that nothing is random. Every encounter, every phrase, every coincidence holds a sacred purpose. They are divine messages disguised as everyday moments, reminders that there is a greater order behind the apparent chaos. Daily prayer keeps that connection alive. It's the invisible thread that links the soul to the center of all things. And it's within that silent dialogue that faith stops being an idea and becomes an experience. You stop simply believing and begin to feel. True faith isn't born from effort. It's born from encounter. It happens when the heart surrenders and the mind becomes quiet. Enough for the divine to reveal itself, and then something extraordinary unfolds. You begin to realize you were never alone. That while you were fighting, God was already working. That while you were crying, He was preparing invisible paths for your renewal. This realization transforms the way you see life. You begin to work with more serenity, love with more presence, face challenges with deeper courage, because now you know, with unshakable certainty, that there's a loving force guiding every single step of your destiny. Prayer then becomes more than a habit. It becomes a state of consciousness, a way of living. You no longer pray just with your lips. You pray with your life. Every breath becomes a conversation. Every silence becomes a sanctuary. Every step becomes part of a sacred dialogue between your soul and the infinite. And that is what it means to live with an unshakable mind. To talk with God is to speak with your soul through every thought, every gesture, every choice. That is how faith matures. Not inside temples, not through speeches, but in the silence of a heart that has finally learned to trust. Right now, I want you to write this in the comments. My mind and my heart connect with God every day. This is more than a phrase. It's a declaration of faith and a powerful psychological exercise. It realigns your thoughts, strengthens your spirit, and invites you to live with purpose and serenity. And if this message has stirred something within you, if it has awakened even a spark of peace, understanding, or hope, then I want to invite you, subscribe now to Unshakable Mind. Here we explore the depths of the human soul, the mystery of consciousness, and the transforming power of faith, not as abstract theory, but as a living path toward real inner change. Every video is a journey within, a sacred encounter with the most divine part of yourself. Stay with me on this path, because the next step will take you even deeper. And remember, God's silence is never absence. It's the space where the answer is being formed. Some messages don't just inform the soul, they transform it. When you cultivate the habit of talking to God every single day, something invisible yet profoundly real begins to awaken inside you. Your mind grows stronger, your heart becomes still, your inner world starts to align with a greater purpose. The chaos that once ruled your thoughts begins to give way to clarity. Confusion slowly transforms into direction. I once said, "He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens." And that awakening, that sacred shift, is exactly what happens when prayer becomes a daily dialogue instead of a ritual act. It's not repetition, it's revelation. It's the process of discovering who you truly are, awakening to your inner strength, your purest essence, and the deeper purpose that God has written into your being since the beginning of time. When the human mind connects with the divine, it begins to operate on a level beyond logic, a frequency of wisdom that transcends all reason. Ideas become clearer, decisions carry more discernment. Even doors that seemed permanently closed begin to open. Suddenly, solutions emerge. Courage blooms where fear once lived, and a quiet, unshakable trust settles into your soul. This is what I once described as active imagination, the dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious mind. But when this dialogue extends to God, it becomes something infinitely more powerful. The mind becomes an instrument of divine providence. You stop being merely a thinker and become a channel, a messenger through whom spirit expresses guidance, clarity, and vision. And the most extraordinary result of all this is not material success, but inner peace. That peace described in Philippians 4:7. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. This isn't poetic symbolism, it's a psychological and spiritual reality. It arises the moment your soul stops resisting and begins to trust, when you finally understand that control is not strength, it's fear disguised as power. Think of the life of Moses. He didn't just pray, he spoke with God. Exodus 33:11 describes something profoundly human and divine at once. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. That passage reveals the very essence of intimacy with the divine. Moses wasn't powerful by nature, his strength came from that. Communion, that continual dialogue with the Creator. It was that sacred friendship that gave him courage to stand before pharaohs, to cross deserts, to lead a nation through uncertainty and chaos. And the same principle applies to your life today. You don't need perfect circumstances to experience the extraordinary. You need connection. When you cultivate a living dialogue with God, a wisdom awakens inside you. A wisdom that no book, no theory, no teacher can give. It gives you vision when everything feels unclear. It gives you strength when your body feels weak. It gives you peace when your mind wants to give up. This connection is not about escaping the world. It's about transforming the way you move through it. Every conversation with God reshapes you from the inside out. It rewires your perception, aligns your emotions, and awakens a divine intelligence that has been quietly waiting to guide you. And that's when you begin to understand the goal of prayer isn't to change God's will. It's to awaken your soul to align with it. That's what makes your faith unshakable. E até os atrasos começam a fazer sentido, porque quem vive em diálogo com Deus entende que até o silêncio dele é resposta. A fé não é a ausência de dúvidas, é a decisão de permanecer, mesmo quando as respostas ainda não vieram. É continuar confiando enquanto o invisível se organiza. Quando você faz da oração um hábito, sua mente deixa de ser refém do medo e passa a ser guiada pela confiança. O Espírito de Deus começa a operar em seus pensamentos, moldando sua forma de enxergar o mundo, inspirando decisões que transformam o destino. A vida deixa de ser uma sequência de acasos e se torna uma jornada guiada pela intenção divina. Eu quero que você entenda algo profundamente. Deus não quer perfeição, Ele quer presença. Não quer palavras ensaiadas, quer corações sinceros. É nesse espaço de honestidade interior que as maiores revelações acontecem. Quando você fala com Deus com autenticidade, a alma se purifica e a mente se organiza. E nessa organização interior, o milagre encontra terreno fértil para florescer. Pare um instante, respire e se pergunte: com que frequência você conversa realmente com Deus? Não pedir, não reclamar, mas conversar, falar e escutar, sentir a presença dele entre uma respiração e outra. E se essa mensagem despertou algo dentro de você, escreva agora mesmo nos comentários: eu desperto para o plano de Deus todos os dias. Essa afirmação é uma semente de transformação, um pacto silencioso entre a sua alma e o divino. E antes de continuarmos, lembre-se de se inscrever no canal Mentalidade Inabalável. Aqui, mergulhamos fundo nas verdades ocultas da mente e da alma humana. Cada reflexão é um espelho da consciência, um convite à fé viva e ao despertar espiritual. Fique comigo, porque no próximo bloco nós vamos aprofundar ainda mais essa conexão. E você vai entender como transformar a presença divina em força prática para o seu cotidiano. Mas antes, precisamos falar sobre algo essencial. Muitas pessoas me perguntam: como posso ouvir Deus em meio a tanto barulho? Como distinguir a voz dele entre tantas tarefas, pensamentos e distrações? A resposta não está em ouvir mais, está em silenciar mais. Jung dizia: quem olha para dentro desperta, e esse despertar começa quando a mente se aquieta o suficiente para perceber o sutil. O divino não fala na pressa, não grita no meio do caos. Ele se manifesta nos intervalos, entre um pensamento e outro. É nesse silêncio vivo, nessa pausa consciente, que a revelação acontece. Ouvir Deus não é esperar um som audível, é perceber um movimento interior, uma intuição que brilha no meio da confusão, uma certeza calma que nasce sem explicação, uma paz que contradiz o medo. Deus fala através dos sinais, das circunstâncias, das pessoas, dos sonhos e até do próprio silêncio. Mas só quem aprendeu a calar o ego consegue ouvir a alma, porque o ego quer controle, a alma quer comunhão. O silêncio é o laboratório do espírito, é nele que a voz divina ganha forma. Veja o exemplo de Daniel. Mesmo em terra estrangeira, ameaçado de morte, cercado por um império que o queria calado, ele manteve sua prática. 3 vezes ao dia, ajoelhava-se e conversava com Deus. O decreto de morte não o impediu. A pressão social não o silenciou. O medo não o dominou. E o resultado foi extraordinário. Ele foi preservado na cova dos leões e exaltado diante dos reis. Mas o verdadeiro milagre de Daniel não foi escapar dos leões. Foi permanecer íntegro dentro do caos, com uma mente e um espírito tão conectados a Deus que nem o medo conseguiu desviá-lo. Essa é a força de quem vive em diálogo constante com o divino. A força de quem confia, mesmo quando não entende. Agora, eu te pergunto, quantas vezes você tomou decisões sem ouvir a voz interior que pedia calma? Quantas oportunidades se perderam porque você confiou apenas na lógica e ignorou o que o coração já sabia? Quantas respostas você buscou fora quando Deus já as sussurrava dentro? Quando a oração se torna diálogo constante, algo extraordinário acontece. Você não apenas recebe respostas, você é transformado por elas. Deus molda seus desejos, alinha seus pensamentos, reorienta seus passos. A oração deixa de ser um pedido e se torna um processo de sincronização entre a sua vontade e a vontade dele. E quando isso acontece, a vida deixa de ser uma corrida desordenada e passa a ter direção. As portas se abrem, os caminhos se iluminam e até os atrasos se revelam como parte do plano, porque quem conversa com Deus não caminha mais sozinho, caminha guiado. There comes a moment in every human life when words are no longer enough, when the noise of the world grows too loud and the soul begins to whisper, "Be still." That stillness is not weakness, it's not absence. It's the sacred ground where the presence of God begins to take shape within you. When prayer becomes a habit, your mind stops being a prisoner of fear and starts becoming a vessel of trust. The Spirit of God begins to move through your thoughts, shaping how you see, how you choose, and how you live. Life stops being a random series of accidents. It becomes a divinely guided path orchestrated by a will greater than your own. I want you to understand something powerful. God doesn't want perfection. He wants presence. He doesn't need rehearsed prayers or flawless words. He desires honest hearts. It's in that space of truth that the greatest revelations happen. When you speak to God with authenticity, your soul begins to purify itself and your mind starts to find order. And it's within that inner alignment that miracles begin to take root. So pause right now, take a breath, and ask yourself, how often do you truly talk to God? Not asking, not complaining, but talking, listening, feeling His presence between one breath and the next. If this message resonates with you, write in the comments, I awaken to God's plan every single day. That affirmation isn't just a sentence, it's a declaration. It's a seed of transformation that realigns your spirit with divine purpose. And before we move on, remember to subscribe to Unshakable Mind, a channel where we explore the deepest layers of the human psyche, the mystery of consciousness, and the unshakable power of faith. Every reflection here is an invitation, a step towards self-awareness, spiritual awakening, and peace that endures. Stay with me, because in the next segment, we'll dive even deeper into this divine connection. You'll learn how to transform God's presence into practical strength for your everyday life. Many people ask me, but how can I hear God when life is so loud? How can I recognize His voice through the constant noise of tasks, thoughts, and distractions? The answer, my friend, is not in hearing more. It's in silencing more. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." That awakening begins when the mind becomes still enough to perceive the subtle, when silence becomes more powerful than noise. The divine doesn't shout in chaos. God doesn't rush. He doesn't compete with your distractions. He moves in the space between thoughts, in the sacred pause between one heartbeat and another. Hearing God isn't about waiting for a voice from the sky. It's about sensing a movement within, an intuition that glows softly amid confusion, a quiet certainty that rises without explanation, a peace that dissolves fear. God speaks through signs, through circumstances, through people, through dreams, and sometimes through silence itself. But only those who have learned to quiet the ego can truly hear the soul. Silence is the laboratory of the spirit. It's where divine communication takes form. Think about Daniel, even in exile, threatened by death, surrounded by an empire that wanted to silence him, he kept his practice. 3 times a day, he knelt and spoke with God. The decree of death couldn't stop him. Social pressure couldn't silence him. Fear couldn't control him. And the result was extraordinary. He was protected in the lion's den and elevated before kings. But the real miracle wasn't surviving the lions. It was remaining whole in the chaos. His mind and spirit were so deeply anchored in God that fear lost all power. That is the strength of those who live in constant dialogue with the divine. Now let me ask you something. How many times have you made decisions ignoring the quiet voice that whispered, "Wait"? How many opportunities were lost because you trusted only logic and silenced the intuition that came from your heart? How many answers have you searched for outside when God was already whispering them within? When prayer becomes a constant dialogue, something extraordinary unfolds. You stop merely asking for answers and start becoming the answer. God begins to shape your desires, align your thoughts, and redirect your path. Prayer stops being a ritual of desperation and becomes a process of synchronization between your will and His. And when that happens, life stops feeling like a chaotic race. It begins to move with divine rhythm. Doors open, paths light up, and even delays reveal themselves as part of perfect timing. This is the peace that transcends understanding. This is what happens when silence becomes sacred. This is the voice of God echoing through your soul. You are not lost. You are being guided. And as you breathe, remember, every Moment of silence can be a prayer. Every pause can be a conversation, and every act of faith brings you one step closer to the unshakable peace that can only come from God. So stay close. In the next chapter, we go deeper. The journey is far from over. The transformation has just begun, right here, inside unshakable mind. There comes a point when everything finally begins to make sense, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You begin to realize it's not that time is taking too long, it's that you are being prepared. Paul and Silas lived this truth in one of the most powerful ways imaginable. They were thrown into prison, beaten, chained, and left in a cold, dark place. Everything around them screamed despair, but instead of giving in, they chose to pray and to sing. They chose to transform pain into connection. And in that moment, something supernatural happened. The chains broke, the doors opened, and even the other prisoners were set free. Do you see? True. Prayer doesn't just change you. It changes the atmosphere around you. It shifts the frequency of the space you occupy. Wherever there is genuine connection with the divine, heaviness dissolves, light enters, and the impossible begins to move. Here's what I want you to understand deeply. God doesn't want you to talk to Him only when you're desperate. He wants you to live in a state of dialogue. When that happens, your heart becomes a compass, and your intuition, the sacred language of the soul, becomes the channel through which the divine speaks. Inner silence is the bridge between the human and the eternal. It's where the unconscious meets the spiritual, and the spiritual meets the conscious. When you learn to be still, you are not escaping life. You are preparing to face it with clarity. So, if you want to hear God, begin by cultivating silence. Turn down the external noise, quiet your thoughts, and allow yourself to feel His presence within you. Faith is not loud, it's steady, in calm and deeply rooted. Write this in the comments right now. I choose silence to hear God. That sentence is not just a statement, it's a spiritual commitment. It's a declaration that you will stop running outward and begin diving inward. And if this message is resonating with your soul, don't forget to subscribe to Unshakable Mind, where every reflection is an invitation to awaken your consciousness, strengthen your faith, and find direction amidst the noise of the world. Stay with me, because in the next block, we'll explore what happens when your mind becomes an ordered space, a sacred ground where the divine can dwell without resistance. Now, think about Paul and Silas again. They prayed and sang at midnight, the darkest hour, the most unlikely place. Yet they chose light, and the result? The chains broke, the doors opened, and everyone was set free. That is the power of those who live in constant dialogue with God, a force that not only transforms the inner world, but radiates outward, changing everything around it. True prayer is not an escape from reality, it's the transformation of reality. It creates a vibration that reorganizes chaos and realigns everything that was once scattered. And this brings us to one of the most profound truths Carl Jung ever shared. What you deny controls you. What you accept transforms you. The shadow, all the parts of ourselves we hide, suppress, or ignore, can only be integrated when we look inward with courage. And the dialogue with God is the most honest mirror of the soul. It's there that we see our flaws without guilt, and our virtues without pride. When you speak with God, you're not just talking to something outside yourself. You're speaking to the deepest part of your being, to the divine spark that lives within your psyche. It's in that inner meeting that fear loses its grip, guilt begins to dissolve, and the soul starts to breathe again. Daily prayer is the practice of integrating mind, heart, and spirit. It's the meeting point between the human and the divine. It's not about asking for things, it's about becoming whole. A divided mind is fragile. A scattered heart is weak. But a soul that speaks with God becomes unshakable. And here lies the great mistake many people make. They wait until everything falls apart before seeking God. They wait for collapse to start the conversation. But the wise don't wait for chaos. They build intimacy before the storm. Don't wait to lose everything before speaking to the one who can give you what truly matters. Don't wait for fear to come before remembering there is refuge. Don't wait for darkness to fall before learning how to light your own flame. The moment you begin this daily dialogue with the divine, your life stops reacting and starts aligning. You no longer live at the mercy of circumstances. You live under divine rhythm. This is not about religion. It's about relationship. It's not about perfection. It's about presence. It's not about escaping the world. It's about transforming it from within, because the truth is, when your soul becomes still enough, you will realize God was never silent. You just hadn't learned to listen. Don't wait for despair to knock on your door before you learn to listen to the voice that guides you in silence. Make it a habit, a daily ritual of presence, before you leave your house, before you make a decision, before you close your eyes to sleep. Talk to God. It doesn't matter if it's a 5-minute conversation or a single sentence whispered in your mind. What matters is consistency, because consistency builds intimacy. And where there is intimacy, there is direction. A life that speaks with God every day does not get lost. It doesn't need to understand every step because it feels the path. It doesn't need control because it lives by trust. It doesn't fear tomorrow because it knows who walks beside it. And when that happens, something powerful begins to radiate from within. The people around you start to notice. They notice the calm in your presence, the clarity in your eyes, the serenity in your voice. They feel a peace in you that the world cannot give and can never take away. That light, born from the dialogue with God, is the very light Jesus spoke of in Matthew 5:14. You are the light of the world. But understand this, that light doesn't come from the ego. It comes from connection. It's the reflection of a soul in harmony with the divine. It's the visible expression of an inner life that has found its center. And maybe that's exactly what the world needs now more than ever. People who radiate peace, not because everything is under control, but because they've learned to trust. People who don't just preach faith, but embody it, quietly, naturally, and authentically. When you talk with God, you become that light. A presence that inspires, calms, and awakens hope in others. Your life becomes a living message. Now I want you to do something simple yet powerful. Write this in the comments. I choose to live in dialogue with God every day. This sentence isn't just a comment, it's a spiritual commitment. It's your way of saying, Lord, I'm here, ready to listen and ready to act. And if this message stirred something in your heart, make sure to subscribe to Unshakable Mind. Here, every video is a bridge between the psychological and the spiritual, between the human unconscious and divine purpose. Stay with me, because in the next and final block, we'll explore what happens when your mind and your spirit come into perfect harmony with God, when conversation becomes direction and faith becomes action. Now write this in the comments. My life transforms when I talk with God every day. This simple phrase holds a spiritual power few people truly understand. When you write it, you're not just leaving a comment, You're declaring a new reality. You're shaping the invisible, turning thought into word, and word into creative power. Carl Jung once said that the human soul is like a mirror turned toward infinity. When you speak with God, that mirror is cleansed of the dust of doubt, guilt, and noise, and the divine image begins to shine clearly within you. Prayer then stops being repetition and becomes revelation. Talk to God, not to ask for what's missing, but to remember who you are. You are not the fear you feel. You are not the past you carry. You are the divine spark, the breath of the Creator within the human experience. And when that awareness awakens, the ordinary becomes sacred. The small things, the sunrise, the silence, the rhythm of work, the look in someone's eyes, all become coded messages from the divine, signs that the universe itself is conspiring for your growth. There's a dimension of being that can only be reached through listening. That's why silence before God is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of presence. It's there, when the mind quiets and the ego steps aside, that the spirit speaks. It speaks through intuition, through coincidences, through subtle sensations that carry the weight of destiny being shaped. When you speak with God every day, something mysterious unfolds. The inner noise begins to fade. Your thoughts find direction. Even your pain begins to make sense, not because the world became easier, but because you became more conscious, more connected, and more aligned with divine order. This is the transformation born from intimacy with God. It doesn't happen in a single prayer. It happens in the rhythm of a soul that has learned to listen. So keep the dialogue alive. Speak, listen, and trust. For every moment spent in communion with God is a seed of eternity planted within time. When you begin to awaken, something profound happens within you. Your mind starts to quiet down, your spirit begins to guide you, and suddenly, life itself feels different. You become more aware, more centered, more led. It's in this sacred state that the human mind becomes a true instrument of divine will. And when that happens, everything realigns. What once felt confusing becomes clear. What was once heavy transforms into purpose. What was once silence begins to speak. Talking to God is not an act of religion. It's an act of courage. Courage to look within. Courage to face your shadows. Courage to surrender control and say with humility, "Lord, guide me, not by my will, but by yours." And that's when the miracle happens. Not outside of you, but within. The invisible chains of fear begin to break, the doors of perception swing open, and the Holy Spirit whispers truths your mind could never fully understand. Life stops being random. It becomes a path of meaning, every step infused with purpose, every moment guided by peace that surpasses all understanding. Carl Jung once spoke of individuation, the process of uniting the conscious and the unconscious. Without even realizing it, he was touching on the same mystery that Scripture calls spiritual rebirth. It's the moment when the natural man yields to the spiritual man, when the human mind bows before divine wisdom and finally realizes, "I am not the center, I am part of the whole." And that's where true freedom is born. So don't let the world harden you. Don't let the rush of life steal your sacred connection. Each day, morning, night, or in the middle of chaos, take a moment to talk with God. Not with hurry, not with religious formality, but with sincerity. Speak as you would to a close friend, and listen as if your very soul is being restored. Because little by little, you'll notice something miraculous. Your mind will become clearer, your emotions will stabilize, and your path will unfold with divine precision. The dialogue with God doesn't just change your circumstances, it rewires your consciousness. It awakens the ancient wisdom within you and aligns your will with His. So, repeat this with me right now. My life transforms when I talk with God every day. Let this be your mantra, your shield, your daily spiritual rhythm. It's not superstition, it's the science of the soul. It's the divine code that reactivates the light that has always lived within you since the beginning of time. Subscribe now to Unshakable Mind and continue this journey of expansion, of mind, of soul, of divine awareness. Here, every word is a seed of transformation. Every reflection is a mirror for your spirit, and every prayer is a step closer to the infinite. Because when your mind awakens to God, your soul reconciles with the universe, and the impossible becomes just the beginning.